Kira pressed her face against the cold metal of the observation deck, watching as plasma bolts lit up the sky like deadly fireworks. Below, the colony of New Haven burned. Smoke rose in twisted columns from what used to be homes, schools, markets. Places where children laughed just yesterday. Status report, she whispered into her comm unit, though she already knew the answer. Static crackled back, then silence. The Vex had come without warning, as they always did. Their massive ships hung in the sky like black scars against the purple dawn, pouring death onto the planet's surface. Kira counted 12 of them. More than enough to wipe out every human settlement on Kepler 442b, ma'am. The voice belonged to Private Chen, barely 18 and shaking like a leaf. The evacuation shuttles, they're not coming back. Kira closed her eyes. Of course they weren't. The shuttles had been destroyed in the first wave, along with the orbital defense platforms and the communication array. They were trapped on a dying world, with no way to call for help and nowhere to run. She turned to face the 37 survivors huddled in the emergency bunker. Colonists mostly, farmers, teachers, mechanics, people who'd come to this distant world to build something beautiful. Now they stared at her with hollow eyes, waiting for her to perform a miracle she didn't have. Captain Martinez? A small voice, from the corner. It was Lila, 8 years old, clutching a stuffed animal that had seen better days. Are the bad aliens going to hurt us? The question hung in the recycled air like a death sentence. Around the bunker, parents pulled their children closer. Someone started crying softly. Kira knelt down to meet Lila's eyes. I won't let them hurt you, she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. I promise. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But sometimes lies were all you had left. The bunker shuddered as another plasma blast hit somewhere nearby. The lights flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, she could hear the distinctive whine of Vex hover tanks moving through the streets. Hunting. Chen appeared at her shoulder, his young face grim. Captain, we've got maybe 4 hours of air left in here, and the door, it won't hold if they bring heavy equipment. 4 hours. Kira did the math in her head. The nearest human colony was 3 star systems away. Even if someone had detected the attack, even if they'd sent help immediately, it would take days for any rescue force to arrive. They were going to die here. She was about to say as much when the emergency comm system crackled to life. The voice that emerged was distorted, filled with static but unmistakably human. Anyone out there? This is Captain Sarah Brooks of the Earth Defense Corps, responding to your distress signal. If anyone can hear this. The bunker fell, silent. 37 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the comm unit like it was a holy relic. Kira grabbed the microphone with trembling fingers. This is Captain Martinez, New Haven Colony, Kepler 442b. We're under attack by Vex forces. 37 civilians in emergency shelter. Please confirm you received our signal. More static. Then, signal confirmed, Captain. We're inbound to your location. ETA 12 minutes. Someone gasped. Someone else started laughing, a sound caught between relief and hysteria. 12 minutes? Kira couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. That's impossible. The nearest human fleet is Captain Martinez. The voice cut through the static, clearer now, closer. This is not a fleet. This is something else entirely. Keep your people safe. We're coming. The transmission ended, leaving them in stunned silence. 12 minutes. It was impossible. But the voice had been so certain, so calm, as if dropping out of hyperspace directly into an active war zone was something they did every Tuesday. Kira looked around the bunker at the lower faces watching her. Hope was a dangerous thing in a situation like this. It could make you careless, it could get you killed, but it was also the only thing keeping them alive. You heard the man, she said, forcing authority into her voice. 12 minutes. Everyone stay calm, stay quiet. Help is coming. Outside, the Vex war machines continued their methodical destruction of everything human on the planet. Their victory was assured. After all, who could possibly stop them now? They were about to find out. Chapter 2. Angels of War. The sky exploded, not with the green fire of Vex plasma cannons, but with something else entirely. Something that screamed through the atmosphere like the wrath of gods, trailing fire and thunder in its wake. Kira pressed her face to the periscope, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Objects were falling from the heavens, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They struck the ground with impacts that shook the bunker's reinforced walls. "Drop pods," Chen whispered beside her, his voice filled with awe. "Someone's making an orbital insertion." But that was impossible. There were no human ships in the system. The distress signal they'd sent would take weeks to reach the nearest colony, and months for any response to arrive. Yet here they were, watching what looked like an entire army falling from the sky. The Vex had noticed too. Their hover tanks were converging on the impact sites, plasma cannons charging with that distinctive high-pitched whine. Overhead, their fighter craft swooped down like mechanical vultures, preparing to annihilate whatever had dared to challenge their dominance. The first pod cracked open like an egg. What emerged wasn't what Kira expected. She'd seen colonial marines before, young men and women in standard-issue combat armor carrying rifles that looked like they'd been built in a factory. What stepped out of that drop pod looked like something from humanity's darkest nightmares. The figure stood nearly 7 feet tall, encased in armor that seemed to drink in the morning light. It moved with predatory grace, raising a weapon that hummed with barely contained energy. When the Vex hover tank opened fire, the warrior simply moved. Faster than anything human should be able to move. The plasma bolts passed harmlessly through empty air while the warrior closed the distance. In impossible bounds, what happened next made Kira's stomach turn. The Vex tank, 50 tons of advanced alien technology, was torn apart like paper. "Dear God," someone whispered behind her. More pods were opening now. Dozens of armored figures emerged into the burning morning, each one moving with that same inhuman speed and precision. They flowed across the battlefield like a tide of death, tearing through Vex forces that had seemed unstoppable just minutes before. But they weren't just killing machines. As Kira watched through the periscope, she saw one of the warriors pause beside a collapsed building. With impossible gentleness, the 7-foot killer lifted a massive concrete beam that had trapped a family of colonists. He helped them to their feet, spoke a few words that Kira couldn't hear, then pointed them toward the emergency shelters before melting back into the battle. "They're human," she breathed. "How are they human?" The question was answered by a voice from the comm system, the same voice that had promised help 12 minutes ago. "Captain Martinez, this is Captain Brooks. We're securing the area around your position. Prepare to move your people to Extraction Point Alpha." "Extraction Point Alpha?" Kira keyed the microphone. "We don't have an Extraction Point Alpha. You do now. Check your tactical display." Kira frowned and activated the bunker's external sensors. Somehow, impossibly, new data was flowing across her screens. Tactical overlays, friendly unit positions, safe routes through the combat zone. Information that shouldn't exist was appearing in real time, as if someone was painting the battlefield for her in perfect detail. "How are you doing this?" she asked. "Questions later, Captain. Your people need to move now. The Vex are bringing in reinforcements." As if summoned by the words, the sky darkened with new shapes. More Vex ships were dropping out of hyperspace. Not the sleek fighters they'd been using, but massive troop transports bristling with weapons. Whatever these Earth warriors were, the Vex were taking them seriously now. Kira made her decision. "All right, people, you heard the man. We're moving out. Stay together, stay low, and follow my lead." She cracked the bunker's seal and led her group into hell. The colony that had been their home was unrecognizable. Buildings lay in ruins, streets were cratered with impact marks, and the air tasted of smoke and ozone. But the most shocking thing was the silence. Where minutes ago the sounds of battle had filled the air, now there was only the crackle of fires and the distant rumble of engines. "Where are the Vex?" Chan asked, his rifle raised and ready. "Gone," said a new voice. They spun, to find one of the armored warriors standing 20 feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing. His armor was scarred and battle-worn, marked with symbols that looked both ancient and futuristic. When he removed his helmet, the face underneath was surprisingly human, older than Kira had expected, with gray eyes that had seen too much. "Captain Martinez?" His voice was the same one they'd heard on the comm. "I'm Marcus Brooks. We need to get your people out of here." "Where exactly are we going?" Kira asked. "And who are you people?" Brooks smiled, and for a moment he looked almost normal, almost human. "We're the Earth Defense Corps, Captain, and right now we're your ride home." He gestured toward the sky, and Kira looked up to see something that made her heart skip. Hanging in the atmosphere above them, barely visible against the clouds, was a ship. Not the sleek vessels of the colonial fleet, but something massive and angular, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That ship is larger than a city. How did it get here without us detecting it?" "Long story," Brooks said, "and we don't have time for it right now. The Vex will be back with everything they've got. We need to be gone before that happens." As if responding to his words, new contacts appeared on Kira's tactical display. Lots of them. "Coming fast. Move," Brooks ordered, and suddenly the world was chaos again. But this time, they weren't running toward death. They were running toward salvation, carried by angels who had fallen from the sky to save them. The question was, what price would they have to pay for that salvation? Chapter 3. The Weight of Legends. The transport that lifted them from the burning. Colony wasn't like any spacecraft Kira had ever seen. The hull was smooth black metal that seemed to absorb light, and when she pressed her hand against the bulkhead, she could feel something humming beneath the surface. Power, but not the clean fusion energy of colonial ships. This felt older. Angrier. "What is this thing?" she asked Brooks as they strapped in for the ride to the orbital ship. "Modified Earth Defense Corps assault transport," he replied, checking his equipment with practiced efficiency. "Enhanced for long-range operations." It was a non-answer, and they both knew it. Kira was about to press him when little Lila tugged on her sleeve. "Captain Martinez?" The girl's eyes were wide with wonder as she stared out the viewport. "Look at all the stars." Kira followed her gaze and felt her breath catch. They were rising through Kepler 442b's atmosphere, and the view was spectacular. But that wasn't what made her heart race. It was what was waiting for them in orbit. The ship Brooks had pointed out from the surface was even more massive than she'd realized. It hung against the star field like a dark mountain, its hull stretching for kilometers. In every direction, weapon batteries dotted its surface like metallic growths, and she could see smaller ships moving around it like pilot fish around a whale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "A ship that size. The power requirements alone would need a dozen fusion reactors. The gravitational stress would tear it apart." "Would it?" Brooks asked quietly. Before she could answer, their transport passed through what looked like a shimmering barrier. The moment they crossed it, every instrument in the cabin went crazy. Gravitational readings spiked and dropped. Electromagnetic sensors showed impossible energy patterns, and the temperature gauges couldn't seem to decide if they were in deep space or standing next to a star. "What was that?" Chen asked, his face pale. "Defensive field," Brooks said. "Standard procedure." "Standard for who?" Kira demanded. "I've been in the Colonial Defense Force for 15 years, and I've never seen technology like this. Where did it come from?" Brooks was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the transport listen. "Tell me, Captain Martinez, what do you know about Earth's history during the expansion wars?" Kira frowned. "The basic facts. Humanity spread to the stars in the early 22nd century. We encountered hostile alien species. There were conflicts. We survived and continued expanding." "That's the sanitized version they teach in schools," Brooks said. "The real story is different, darker." The transport shuddered as they entered the massive ship's docking bay. Through the viewports, Kira could see row upon row of smaller craft, fighters, bombers, assault ships. All of them bore the same dark, angular design as their transport. During the early expansion, Brooks continued, humanity faced extinction multiple times. The Krex Dominion nearly wiped us out in 2187. The Void Hunters came even closer in 2203. Each time we survived by the narrowest of margins. They felt the transport settle onto a docking cradle with a soft thud. Around them, the 37 survivors of New Haven Colony sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything they'd seen and heard. After the Void Hunter War, Brooksy said, Earth's government made a decision. Never again would humanity face extinction because we weren't prepared. Never again would our colonies burn, while help was weeks or months away. The transport's doors hissed open, revealing a docking bay that could have held a small city. Personnel in the same dark armor moved with military precision, directing refugees toward what looked like medical stations and processing centers. Welcome, aboard the ENS Retribution, Brooks said, standing up. Flagship of the Earth Defense Corps Deep Strike Fleet. Deep Strike Fleet? Kira stood as well, her mind racing. I've never heard of any Deep Strike Fleet. Most people haven't. We operate in the spaces between spaces, Captain. We go where the regular fleet can't follow, and we do what needs to be done to keep humanity safe. They filed out of the transport, into the massive bay. Kira found herself staring at everything. The impossible architecture, the advanced technology, the personnel who moved like predators even when helping refugee children. How many ships? She asked. In this fleet, 12 dreadnoughts, 47 cruisers, 216 escort vessels. Brooks rattled off the numbers like he was discussing the weather. Plus support craft, troop transports, and specialized units. The numbers were staggering. A fleet that size could conquer entire star systems, could potentially stand against the combined forces of every human colony in existence. Why haven't we heard about you? Chen asked the question Kira was thinking. Brooks paused at the entrance to a corridor that stretched away into the ship's depths. Because we operate under Article 7 of the Earth Defense Compact, Deep Black Authorization. What we do, where we go, how we do it, all classified at the highest levels. And what exactly do you do? Kira pressed. We hunt monsters, Captain Martinez. We find the things that want to destroy humanity, and we make sure they can't. We're walking through corridors now, passing personnel who nodded respectfully to Brooks but kept their distance. The refugees stayed close together, overwhelmed by the ship's size and the obvious military discipline of its crew. The Vex, Brooks continued, have been expanding into human space for 3 years. They've destroyed 17 colonies that we know of. Official policy is to evacuate threatened settlements and establish defensive perimeters around major population centers. That's standard doctrine, Kira said. Protect what you can, minimize losses. We don't operate under standard doctrine. Brooks stopped walking and turned to face her. Our job is to make sure threats like the Vex never get the chance to destroy another human world. By doing what? By following them home. The words hit Kira like a physical blow. Following them home meant tracking the Vex back to their own territory. It meant taking the war to them, fighting on their ground with their rules. It meant becoming the monsters. You're talking about genocide, she whispered. I'm talking about survival, Brooks replied. The Vex don't negotiate, Captain. They don't surrender. They don't coexist. They consume everything in their path until there's nothing left but empty worlds and radiation. They'd reached what looked like an observation deck. Through massive viewports, Kira could see the fleet arrayed around them, ship after ship of dark, angular vessels bristling with weapons. In the distance, she could make out the dying glow of Kepler 442b's cities. We tried peaceful contact, Brooks said quietly. We tried negotiation. We tried defensive measures. Do you know what the Vex response was? Kira shook her head. They broadcast a message on all frequencies. One word repeated in perfect human standard. Food. The observation deck fell silent, except for the distant hum of the ship's systems. Somewhere in that silence, little Lila started crying. Not the loud wails of a frightened child, but the quiet sobs of someone who understood that the world had changed forever. So what happens now? Kira asked. Brooks smiled, and this time there was nothing human in the expression at all. Now we show the Vex what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness. Now they learn why Earth never sends just one ship. Through the viewports, more shapes were materializing out of hyperspace. Not the sleek vessels of the Colonial Defense Force, but more ships like the Retribution. Massive, angular, bristling with weapons that looked like they could crack planets. The Earth Defense Corps had arrived in force, and somewhere in the depths of space, the Vex were about to learn that humanity had been holding back. Chapter 4. The Hour of Wolves. Admiral Chen Zhao stood on the command deck of the ENS Retribution, watching tactical displays that showed a level of destruction most humans couldn't imagine. Around him, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had seen the end of worlds and learned to function anyway. Vex reinforcement fleet is moving to intercept, reported his tactical officer, Commander Sarah. Kim. 347 vessels, including 12 of their heavy dreadnoughts. Our strength? Zhao asked, though he already knew the answer. Full Deep Strike Fleet Alpha, 275 ships, including all 12 of our Titan-class vessels. The numbers were in the Vex favor, but numbers had never been the deciding factor in battles like this. The Vex fought with overwhelming force and technological superiority. Humanity fought with something else entirely. Signal the fleet. Zhao ordered. All ships execute Protocol 7. Around the bridge, officers began implementing orders that existed in no official military manual. Throughout the fleet, ships that had looked merely dangerous began transforming into something else entirely. Hull plates retracted to reveal weapon systems that shouldn't exist. Energy readings spiked beyond anything conventional reactors could produce. The very space around the human fleet began to shimmer with barely contained forces. In the refugee processing center, Kira felt the ship change around her. The deck plates vibrated with new harmonics, and the air itself seemed to thicken with potential energy. "What's happening?" she asked the medic who was checking Lila's vitals. "Fleet's going hot," the woman replied without looking up. "You might want to find something solid to hold on to." Before Kira could ask what that meant, Captain Brooks appeared at her shoulder. His expression was grim, and the weapon at his side hummed with the same energy she'd felt in the ship's hull. "Captain Martinez, I need you and your senior personnel to come with me." "Where?" "To see what we really are." They followed him through corridors that seemed to pulse with hidden life, past sections of the ship that looked more like temples than military installations. The walls were covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and the air tasted of ozone and something else, something that made Kira's skin crawl. "Brooks," she said as they walked, "what aren't you telling us?" "Everything," he replied simply. "And I'm about to fix that." They emerged onto an observation deck that overlooked the fleet's battle formation. But what Kira saw through the massive viewports made no sense. The ships weren't just arranged for combat. They were positioned in complex geometric patterns that seemed to bend the light around them. During the Void Hunter War, Brooks said, humanity learned something important. We learned that some enemies can't be defeated with conventional weapons. Some threats require different approaches. "Different how?" Chen asked, his young face pale as he stared at the impossible formations outside. The Void Hunters weren't just aliens, Private. They were something else, something that existed partially outside normal space-time. Fighting them with regular weapons was like trying to shoot shadows. More ships were emerging from hyperspace now, not human vessels, but the distinctive biomechanical craft of the Vex. They moved with organic fluidity, their hulls rippling like living skin. As Kira watched, they began forming their own battle formations. "So we adapted," Brooks continued. "We learned to use their own methods against them. We learned to step outside the normal rules of physics and warfare. The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness between the fleets. Vex plasma cannons fired bolts of superheated energy that could vaporize asteroids. They struck the human ships dead on and accomplished nothing. The energy simply stopped. Meters from the human hulls, the devastating plasma bolts encountered something that shouldn't exist and were absorbed, redirected, or simply ceased to be." "How?" Kira whispered. "Dimensional warfare," Brooks said. "We don't fight in 3 dimensions anymore, Captain. We fight in 7. The human fleet's response was unlike anything in the military manuals. Instead of conventional weapons, they fired, something that looked like controlled tears in reality itself. Where the tears touched Vex ships, matter simply stopped existing, not destroyed, not vaporized, gone, as if it had never been there at all. "Dear God," someone whispered. "What have you become?" Brooks turned to face them, and for a moment his human facade slipped entirely. Behind his eyes, Kira glimpsed something, vast and alien and terrible. "We became what we needed to become," he said. "We became the thing that monsters fear." The battle raged outside, but it wasn't really a battle anymore. It was an execution. The Vex, despite their superior numbers and advanced technology, were being systematically annihilated by forces they couldn't understand or counter. The first rule of dimensional warfare, Brooks explained as another wave of Vex ships simply ceased to exist, is that conventional physics only applies if you let it. The second rule is that consciousness shapes reality more than most people realize. And the third rule? Kira asked, though she was afraid of the answer. There isn't one. That's what makes it so dangerous. On the tactical displays, the Vex fleet was trying to retreat. Their remaining ships were attempting to jump to hyperspace to escape the nightmare they'd stumbled into. But space itself seemed to be working against them. Their hyperspace windows collapsed before they could form. Their ships moved through what should have been empty vacuum like swimmers fighting through thick mud. "We're not letting them leave," Brooks said quietly. "Every Vex in this system dies here. Today. Now." "All of them?" Chen's voice cracked. "Even the ones trying to surrender?" "The Vex don't surrender, Private. They retreat, regroup, and come back with worse weapons. The only way to stop them permanently is to make sure they never leave." The last Vex ship died in silence, its biomechanical hull simply unraveling at the molecular level. Where moments before there had been a fleet of hundreds, now there was only empty space and the fading glow of scattered particles. "It's over," someone said. "No," Brooks replied. "It's just beginning." New contacts were appearing on the tactical displays. Not more Vex reinforcements, but something else entirely. Ships that registered on sensors as both there and not there, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "What are those?" Kira asked. "Our next target," Brooks said. "The Vex were just the warm-up act, Captain. The real monsters are still out there in the dark between the stars, and we're going to find every last one of them." Through the viewports, the human fleet was already moving, not toward home, not toward safety, but deeper into the unknown, toward threats that most of humanity didn't even know existed. "You can't keep doing this," Kira said. "This kind of power, it changes you. I can see it in your eyes, in the way your crew moves. You're not human anymore." Brooks was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Maybe not," he said. "But we're still humanity's shield. We're the ones who go into the dark so that worlds like New Haven can exist in the light. And when there are no more monsters to fight, then we'll find new ones. Because that's what we are now, Captain Martinez. We're the monsters that hunt monsters. And as long as there are threats to humanity out there, we'll keep hunting." The fleet was disappearing into hyperspace now, one ship at a time. Soon only, the Retribution remained, a dark sentinel against the stars. "Take the refugees home," Brooks ordered his bridge crew. "All of them. Every survivor from every world we've saved. Give them new lives, new hope." "And us?" Kira asked. "We go back to the dark," Brooks said simply. "Because somewhere out there something else is planning to hurt humanity. And we'll be waiting for it." As the Retribution prepared for its own jump to hyperspace, Kira found herself staring at the tactical displays one last time. The symbols and readouts made no sense to her trained eye, but she could see the scope of what was out there. Threats beyond counting, enemies beyond imagination, horrors that existed in the spaces between stars, and standing against all of it, a fleet of ships crewed by people who had chosen to become something other than human in order to keep humanity. First, it was the most terrifying and beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Epilogue. The Long Watch. 6 months later, Kira stood on the observation deck of New Harmony Station, watching ships come and go in the civilian traffic lanes. The station was one of humanity's newer colonies, built with all the latest defensive technologies and staffed by the Colonial Defense Force's best personnel. It was also completely inadequate to defend against the kinds of threats she'd seen. Captain Martinez? The voice belonged to Director Adams, the station's administrator. Your transport to Earth is ready. Kira nodded, still staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the dark between worlds, the Earth Defense Corps was hunting monsters, fighting battles that would never appear in history books, saving lives that would never know they'd been in danger. Ma'am, Adams prompted. Your transport? I'm not taking it, Kira said quietly. I'm sorry? She turned to face him, and Adams took an involuntary step back at what he saw in her eyes. It was the same look she'd seen in Brooks and his crew, the look of someone who had stared into the abyss and understood what was staring back. I said I'm not taking the transport to Earth, Director. I have other plans. But your debriefing with Colonial Command can wait. Kira walked past him toward the communications center. I need to send a message. The message was simple, transmitted on a frequency that officially didn't exist. Captain Sarah Martinez, formerly of the Colonial Defense Force, requesting transfer to Earth Defense Corps Deep Strike Operations. I've seen what's out there. I want to help. The response came 3 hours later, text only. Transfer approved, report to coordinates attached. Welcome to the Long Watch. That night, as Kira packed her few belongings, little Lila appeared in her doorway. The girl had been adopted by a family on New Harmony, but she still visited Kira regularly. Are you leaving? Lila asked. Yes, sweetheart, I have to go do something important. Are you going to fight the bad aliens again? Kira knelt down to meet the girl's eyes. I'm going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. Lila hugged her tightly. Will you come back? The question hung in the air like a prayer. Kira thought about Brooks and his crew, about the look in their eyes and the weight they carried. She thought about the things humanity faced in the dark, and the price of standing against them. I don't know, she said honestly, but someone has to go. The next morning, a transport arrived at New Harmony Station. It was small, unmarked, and registered on no official fleet roster. When it departed, it carried one additional passenger toward a destiny written in darkness and necessity. In the weeks that followed, strange reports began filtering in from the outer colonies. Ships appearing out of nowhere to aid settlements under attack. Rescue operations conducted by forces that didn't officially exist. Entire fleets of hostile aliens simply vanishing without explanation. The Colonial Defense Force investigated these reports but found nothing. No evidence of the mysterious defenders, no trace of their technology, no official records of their existence. But in the spaces between the stars, where normal physics bent and reality itself became negotiable, humanity's true guardians continued their work. They fought in dimensions that had no names, using weapons that redefined the possible, protecting a species that would never know their names. They were the Earth Defense Corps, and they had accepted the ultimate sacrifice, their humanity, to ensure that humanity itself would survive. In the dark between worlds, they kept their vigil. And in that darkness, monsters learned to fear the night, because Earth's warriors had fallen from the sky, and they were never going home. End of transmission.